Hey, everybody, welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Kirby, and of course, we talk with people who are going to help our small and medium-sized nonprofits do good better. I was a politics major out of college, which meant I was unemployed because I didn't know how to do anything at all. And I found myself falling backwards into the nonprofit world. And I've been obsessed with advocacy and politics behind the scenes forever. And so when I get to have a guest on that gets to talk nerdy politics and advocacy stuff with me, I jump at it. And you might be thinking, I'm a small nonprofit. I don't have anything to do with politics and advocacy, and I don't even have the capacity to do so. Nay, folks. Nay, buckle up because we're going to talk about it today and how you can actually make bigger change doing the awesome things that you're doing and talking about how much you need support and help and where do you go and what do you do, answering all these questions from my guest today, Jeb Ory. He is the co-founder and products, head of products over at Capital Canary. Jeb, welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast.
Thanks, Patrick. It's really wonderful to be here.
I'm excited for this. Again, I don't get the chance to talk advocacy and policy a lot on the old podcast. And so I'm going to embrace this moment for a little bit. But before we get started, there's probably folks who are looking at this either on iTunes or they found us on Spotify or they're looking at YouTube and they're saying, this sounds like an interesting bit, but I'm not really sure who this guy is or who he works for. So before we get started, can you give us kind of a 5,000-foot view on who you are, what you do, and why we're talking today?
Sure thing. And it's funny, you're a politics major. I studied international relations in college. I had a chance to intern in the Senate. They didn't pay interns back then, so I had a night job waiting tables at a local Irish pub, which I learned so much from. And then I got to work for a international NGO. And those experiences were absolutely foundational for kind of setting me on a path. So can't say enough about where the political oriented degrees can take you.
Love it.
So anyway, kind of fast forward, about 10 years ago, I started a company called Phone to Action, which became Capital Canary. We rebranded a little bit earlier this year because of an idea my co-founder had. So my co-founder is a woman named Jimena Hartsock. She's Chilean. She has a really thick accent. She came to the country when she was in her early 20s and kind of had a whole bunch of different jobs and worked her way up and created a career in education. And she ended up working for Michelle Rhee, who was one of the founders, or was the chancellor of DC Public Schools, and went on after city government to start an education advocacy group. And Jimena's job was to get parents and teachers together in a room and talking about education policy. And she would spend a lot of time and energy getting everyone in a room, and they'd have big speakers come in and they'd fire the crowd up. And then there was this moment at the end where the people were like, well, what can we do? We want to do something right now. And it was just crickets. You know, sometimes speakers say, oh, well, you can follow me on Twitter. This is, again, 2011, 2012, early days of social media, or maybe mid to early days of social media. Nobody, that didn't really move policy, didn't move the dial. So people started saying, well, you're talking a lot about changing policy. Can we contact lawmakers? And they said, oh, yeah, go home tomorrow, Google, find out who your state senator is and give her a call. And these parents are like, we're not going to do that. We have work and kids and jobs, and we want to act right now. So Jimena felt this compulsion to create an opportunity for people to act right then and there so they could take action. But there weren't tools that did that. There were a few systems where people could log in and maybe send an email on a computer to a lawmaker, but nothing that worked in the smartphone. And you may remember, maybe some of the people here on this podcast remember back in 2012, only about 25% of American adults had smartphones. Mm-hmm. So now it's hard to find anybody, 10-year-old and up that doesn't have some kind of, mobile smart device. But back then it wasn't a foregone conclusion. But Jimena had worked in schools and had seen how, there were people that were early adopters that were taking phones in and out. And she's not the students, but, people that worked in the schools, the staff She's like, this is going to go everywhere. Jeb and I, we met each other, and I had another mobile company at the time. She's like, Jeb, is there any way that we can make an app so people can email their lawmakers using GPS from their phones? I said, sounds interesting. And started to look into that. And we ended up finding out the answer is yes. Yes, you can. You actually can use mobile technology to make it possible for people to do just about anything. And we created a product that made it easy for people to email lawmakers from their phones in seconds. And we had a chance to roll it out at, these organizations would have these events, and they'd get people in a room, and everyone had a chance to take action. So we gave power to people that wanted to engage. And then we gave these organizations a way to track it and to know, hey, that was effective, that worked, that moved the dial. And that's really kind of what started our business. So we founded the company in 2012. Every bootstrap startup story you can think of, we were doing. But we found some investors, and it was hard to raise investment capital. What we were doing was really new, but we found some people that supported us, an accelerator, early investors. We went to competitions where we had to win. We did all the things to put yourself on a map. And the reality is, for a lot of small nonprofits, it's very similar to startup. You got to be scrappy. You got to be innovative. You have to figure out how to break through the noise and stand out. So I think part of what our growth and our story has been is pretty similar to what successful small organizations are doing every single day. It's, you have to have conviction that what you're doing makes sense, and you have to work like heck to make it happen.
What I love about this is that, and we talk about this on the podcast a lot, is planning the plan. The plan is just another plan that you're going to plan eventually, and it's boring unless you do something about it, right? What are you going to actually do? And what I love about this is the concept of, okay, we're all fired up. You're at a gala, you hear a story, you get this wonderful thing. What the hell do I do next? If you're not saying give, or you're not saying, sort of do, you've wasted an opportunity. And I think this is what I love about the idea of advocacy, is that if somebody doesn't have the financial capacity to give you a certain amount of money, they've got time, and they've got talent, and they've got words, and they've got a vote, and they've got a whole lot of other things that they can use for your organization. But I think a lot of nonprofits will look at this or hear the word advocacy, and they will immediately go, I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. If they don't know about it or don't know what to do. How do we get out of that mind space first? I mean, I think that's the first question of I'm a nonprofit leader, or I'm a person who's volunteered at a nonprofit. I'm a board member. Advocacy doesn't seem like something I should be doing at all. Am I wrong? Am I right? As a nonprofit.
Yeah. So I think what's interesting is that the term advocacy means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Mm-hmm. And the best definition I saw of advocacy is this very expansive definition that includes everything from voter education to issue education to direct lobbying. Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff in between. In the field, when we say advocacy, sometimes we mean digital grassroots advocacy, right? Which may mean facilitating constituent education and communication to elected officials by those constituents, so they can explain their positions on policies and implore lawmakers to take action on something. Mm-hmm. But the actual term advocacy is a very broad one, and it encompasses a whole bunch of things. And a nonprofit that, a good example, the church that I'm a member of is an Episcopalian church here in Capitol Hill. And there may be 300 to 400 congregants, but the church has a yoga studio. And the church rents out the nave for music concerts. So there's all these great concerts that come through. And there are organizations that will use the space for free for different types of advocacy work, things around climate and gun control and stuff like that. So the church is just a church, right? It's a 501c3 nonprofit, like the vast majority of what we call nonprofits, 501c3s. But it does all these different activities, and different people use it for, different purposes, the same way churches and synagogues and mosques are used throughout the country. And the church has an outreach arm that does different types of, education and work in the field, and, feeding programs and things like that. So the church could be a group that uses that, that does advocacy. There's also a group of the Washington Interfaith Network that the church is a part of, that are like faith leaders from across all the major religions that work on, collective issues together. So I think advocacy has such an expansive definition. And I think that's what can be really maybe nervy about it. If you're a nonprofit service provider, and you're worried about, well, I don't want to lobby people, but giving education, or maybe like giving people the chance to register to vote, that actually is also advocacy. It's just not lobbying. And there can be really big differences. So I think that most organizations that are listening that may be nervous, you probably are doing something that could be constituted as advocacy, but it's not tripping your wires because it's so far away from maybe what, people might have to register to do that, it's not a concern.
It's storytelling. It's sharing your passion for whatever your organization does. That's advocacy, folks. I mean, that's what it is. How you're sitting in a room, you're telling me that you're standing on stage and you're a food scarcity organization, you're a food bank, and you've got a list of people who are in the room, and you're sharing the story about families who are struggling because of the high inflation rate, and they don't know where they're going to find their next meal. You're a supplemental group to this, and then you're sharing the impact of what their gifts have done. I think you're not advocating for more gifts and more support throughout there, or you're not, or you're going up to a group, a Lions Club, for example, right? And they invite you to tell your story about what you do, and you are enthusiastic and you're passionate about it, or you recruit other volunteers to tell that story on your behalf. You're an advocate. Sorry, you're now a change maker, and so you're a community organizer by any stretch of the imagination. And I love what you said about this. There's so many different ways to think about it. And I think our connotation is immediately, oh boy, I got to start waving a flag, and I got to start marching, and I got to start doing these things. And I don't want that tethered or attached to my, how my organization looks and feels, but you're already doing it. It's just a matter of how you want to sort of get it. So maybe kind of run through some advantageous, why is it advantageous to at least concentrate or focus or talk about or sort of rewire your brain about what advocacy can do?
Absolutely. So maybe a little bit of context too. So our company is a software company, and we have 1,200 customers. And I would say probably 800 or 900 of them use our technology for digital grassroots advocacy and organizing. So we come to this with a fair amount of experience in seeing how organizations are engaging. And what's been really interesting over the years is that the types of organizations with whom we work has really expanded. And I think that's kind of underscoring some of what you're talking about too, is people are thinking about getting involved. We do have a number of food banks that we work with. And we have organizations that may, have a couple people that, there's a person that spends a couple hours a week doing communications work. They may send emails out of MailChimp. They may create some advocacy campaigns out of our software when they need to be able to mobilize people. But I think that the crux of what we see is that when an organization, to your point before, like they may not have a large set of people that are going to donate a whole lot of money. That may be your situation. That's pretty common. But people can donate time.
Yep.
They can donate their support. They can certainly engage with the content that you're sharing online. So what we've seen, some of the most successful organizations, the small but mighty ones that are able to make policy change, are able to enlist their board members and enlist their databases, even if it's just a couple hundred people, to all do the same thing at the same time to make some waves.
Yeah.
And if they all can take something and do something at the same time and light up social media and maybe light up a lawmaker's inbox at the exact same time with a message that comes from the heart, that speaks to their values, they can actually make change. And just having your board, the average nonprofit may have 4 or 5 people on the board. Maybe they don't donate, maybe they don't, but they all can share a message on Facebook, and when you tweet something out, they can all retweet it. Yeah. So I think that there's a super high impact amount of low-hanging fruit that amplifies the message. One thing that we also recommend is that if you text message, one thing you can do is whenever you have key messages you want to get out, make sure that your board is subscribed, because there's not a better way to demonstrate the type of work that you're doing than to make sure your board is actually hearing those communications. And we found that texting cuts through the noise that email and other forms of communication just can't do. So we have one association client that always makes sure that every board member gets a text when they send out an alert about something urgent. And that has brought so much visibility to the program, because all the executives are getting their texts, all the board members are getting the text and knows, hey, we're active, we're engaged. That makes them feel really good about the work that the organization is doing.
Yeah, I don't know what the numbers are in each individual state on the average of letters or notes that a representative or a senator gets about certain votes, right? But I do have a story locally in North Dakota where a lawmaker said, if I'm not getting emails and they're not over like 20 emails about the same thing, I'm not paying attention to it. Now, the minute that email list goes above 20 or 25 or 30 emails about the same topic, they stop and they pay attention. And so if you don't think it works, I'm listening to people in the Capitol saying the exact same thing you're saying, is that they drop everything when stuff gets a little wild and it breaks through the noise. Because if you have a smattering of an email here, maybe an email 2 weeks later, maybe another email a week later about a topic or a payment system. Part of the thing that we're talking about right now is in inflationary pay for providers for individuals with developmental disability and delay, right? North Dakota gave them a 2.5% increase last year and 0.25% of increase this year. Well, I'm not sure if that's keeping up with inflation there, kiddos, but that's okay, right? They're not going to listen to 1 or 2 executives from the same provider groups that are going to do it over and over again. They expect it. That's part of their gig. You get 15, 20, 90, 150 emails about the same thing from the same committee that's trying to figure out some of this. All of a sudden, your eyes pop out of your, like, what the heck is going on in the community that I'm not paying attention to? You snap on them out of their malaise, and they're now, sort of at least considering something, right?
Yeah, well, there's actually, so from that standpoint, if we're talking about breaking through the noise with state legislators, there are a couple paths from sending emails. Yeah, it's either 20 or more or something, or it's one with a compelling subject line. So many state lawmakers have access to their email on their phones. And it's a separate inbox, but I mean, most state legislatures are part-time. There are a few like California and a few others that are full-time. Some bicameral ones are, or biannual ones are like every other year, right? Like Texas, and a few others. Is North Dakota like that? Or?
Oh yeah, it is.
Yeah. So, it's not their full-time job. That's kind of the reality. So they'll check their inbox. And there's a compelling subject line. They'll read that message, and if they get a whole bunch of the same, they'll read one of those messages, and they'll know, okay, this is about this issue, and they keep a track, they keep tally. So I do think that you're right. Like there are a couple different ways to break through, and we think there's a quality and a quantity tactic that you can deploy depending on the size of your database. So the message is, if you're engaged in grassroots advocacy and you're an organization that has a small list, focus on message and storytelling personalization. And if you have a larger list, that's where the personalization helps. Personalization at scale can really help. but volume can also be effective in terms of how Patrick just talked about. So I'll share a story. So one of our clients is a larger nonprofit, the American Heart Association. And when we first started working with them, there was a campaign they were working on in New York, and it was about CPR. And one of their key policy pillars was training people, so making sure that high school students could learn how to give CPR. And in the past, before they did this campaign, they had talked about the high numbers of people that die from sudden cardiac arrest. Lots of people die, big numbers, should be really scary. But it didn't really stick with people. So they changed their campaign, and they found 5 parents who had lost children, middle school, high school kids, to a heart attack or other kinds of cardiac arrest. And they had those parents share their stories and use that story to urge people to act and tell their lawmakers about how important that was. And the stories that each individual, like you could call a number, you could hear them share their story, say, okay, now we're going to patch you through to the lawmakers so you can tell them yourself why this is important. So hearing, 30 seconds of somebody's story was incredibly powerful, and it mobilized a record number of people to share their own stories with lawmakers, and it ended up becoming law. So graduating seniors would have had a course on how to give CPR. And it was connecting the need, hey, people don't know how to do this, this can save lives, with the stories of people who had had those tragedies happen. That made a big difference. When you just deal in the big numbers, people kind of gloss over. But once you start telling about the story and make it about the person, that makes a huge difference. So we've seen that the organizations that can focus their advocacy around a story or stories of people that are impacted, they make a much bigger difference. They end up getting the media to cover it much more often than if they're just talking about the big numbers of people that are affected by something.
That's so true too. And I think a lot of people get frustrated with like, hey, why isn't anybody paying attention to us? We've got this event coming up, or we've got this thing that we're talking about. We're like this program that we're running. Nobody cares. I mean that in the nicest possible way. Nobody cares. The media doesn't care.
Right.
If it's about a person or a family that's directly affected positively or negatively by something, that's where the attention goes.
Right.
So I love what you're saying about that. It's what we talk about from the nonprofit all the time is, personalize a lot of this stuff. If you're up on stage and you're just talking about, hey, look at what we do. Hey, look at all the things that we're doing. We're doing great work here. You're not making an impact. You bring somebody up who says the things that this organization has done for us. They solved this, they did this. I'm a witness to whatever they're doing. The whole audience is like compelled to listen to you now because it's intriguing. They go, wow, this person is not getting paid by the organization. They might have benefits by it, but they're not getting paid by this organization. That's a third-party endorsement, my friend. And that's really, really good. It's why we trust random people on the internet to give us the Amazon reviews. This is the weird thing that we live in, but that's what it is. And so you're using this proven advocacy strategy. You're putting personalization that's something that needs to happen immediately. And now you're making some big, interesting changes in the world. What sort of changes or what sort of policy tweaks have you seen from individuals using your app, using your system, using some of those things? Is there like what sort of thing or what sort of sands are beginning to shift as you're working on some of these projects?
Well, there's stuff large and small, and impacting single individuals and impacting entire communities. Mm-hmm. One of our partners is the Innocence Project, and they have been involved in a number of high-profile cases in Texas. Rodney Reed and Melissa Lucio, both people that were on death row, that they mobilized their network of people, both throughout the country and in Texas, to communicate to various stakeholders in Texas, from the governor's office to state lawmakers to like the board of parole and things like that. And what I've noticed with some of their campaigns is the extremely high engagement they get from people. The urgency, a lot of the campaigns hit a peak right before people's designated execution date, which that is as final as you can get. And what we tend to see making difference for campaigns, and most effective campaigns, are tied to urgency and existential pain. And there is nothing more so than an execution, right? Like, so those campaigns drive a ton of engagement, and they give people a really important way to speak out about a system that many find inequitable and unfair. So that's one example. We had a number of clients that got very engaged around at the beginning of the pandemic, and in advocating for different types of relief and support for their organizations, fields, professions, or industries. And those also saw tremendous engagement because, as you know, it was like in the first couple months of the pandemic, we had no idea. Well, first we thought it was going to be 2 weeks, and then, but one of our clients is the Association of American Nurses, the American Nurses Association. And it may be hard to believe now, but 2.5 years ago, nobody, or almost, I don't say nobody, the average person did not know what PPE meant. Mm-hmm. Personal protective equipment. So I remember seeing a landing page that the American Nurses were putting out about asking Congress to approve authorization for more PPE funding, and be like, PPE, what is that? And I remember Googling it. And now it's in all of our lexicons, and we know exactly what it is. But what we saw in that moment was so many people engaging. So, this organization may have had 50,000, 60,000 members, that many people on their database. But what happened was that, another 100,000 engaged. So these are people that may, know nurses, have nurses in their families, just be, you see something on social media.
Yeah. So, I love that as an example too, is because I love what you said about the sense of urgency.
Yeah.
I think a lot of nonprofits are passive enough, or they think that they don't want to be like the boy who cried wolf kind of thing. If it's not a thing, no, that's not what we're saying. But if there's an end game, if there's a timeline, if there's a time frame, people are very motivated to help if they know that some sort of thing is going to occur. And to quickly be able to communicate that and not get lost in the spam folder, I think is an increasingly beneficial sort of thing. Okay, so I'm a nonprofit. I think some of this sounds good to me, but I don't know where to start. Like, how do I maybe get a hold of somebody who knows what the heck they're doing as it pertains to using particular products that might help me with my advocacy or starting product? Is there someplace I could go, Jeb?
You could, yeah. So you could go to our website and learn more at capitalcanary.com. Or you can Google around for grassroots advocacy and find different solutions. There's an organization that I would call small but mighty, called SECUS. This is Sex Ed for Social Change. They are a recent partner of ours, and they're an example of a small nonprofit that has a clear vision for what they can do and the type of impact they can make. And they are looking at different ways they can engage their stakeholders. And part of what they see from grassroots advocacy is a way to demonstrate to their advocates that they are focused on policies that are important at the state level to their constituencies. Mm-hmm. And they're actively engaging on them. And that is such an important step to take, because it shows clearly to, the organization and all the people that care about the organization, that you're looking at different things you can do. It's not just programmatic. You're actually, giving tools to your supporters and asking them to do something besides just give money. Everybody wants to be able to raise more money, but maybe, some of the people that you have that care about your organization aren't in a position to be able to do that. So I look at organizations like SECUS, like Sex Ed for Social Change, and I see a real forward-thinking approach to generating support and galvanizing the public around issues that really matter to them. And I think that type of model is really scalable for nonprofits that are looking at different ways they can grow, because it also gives you something that you can do and then read out to your supporters, here are some actions we've concretely taken to make a difference.
I love this because it's an alternative to asking for money.
Yep.
And it's a way to communicate with your supporters that they can get involved without sort of opening up their checkbook, which is number one, great. It gives you a chance to give them updates. It gives you a chance to show the support for them, for their ability to tell your own story. And what it does is it sets the table for these individuals who are advocates for you. That's a real strong indicator that somewhere down the road, they're going to be a big financial supporter of you as well. It's probably a better indicator than any sort of thing you're running through a computer system of like, what's their wealth screening going to be? It doesn't matter if they don't care about what you do. Finding somebody who's going to be a leader in your advocacy for whatever you're trying to accomplish, that's going to be your better indicator to raise a whole heck of a lot more money later on down the line, which I really, 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 really dig. I love the examples. It's been a really interesting sort of vibe. And I like the fact that this is really doable for small and medium-sized nonprofits. This is not a thing that you have to shy away from, that you are doing advocacy already. But you should probably go and click on the show notes when you're done with this episode, everybody, and get a hold of Jeb and the rest of the crew over at Capital Canary. Because I think there's a way that you can probably figure out how to use, something that they're doing for your benefit as well. And by the way, if you're not subscribed to the show and you're clicking on the internet, you should do that first, and then immediately go back to the show notes and click on Capital Canary and get a hold of Jeb. Thank you so much for what you do. I think this is it's a fascinating way in order to use your to galvanize your volunteers, to open up the supporter base to doing something other than just showing up for another fundraising thing. And I think beneficial for a lot of social groups that are trying to make a difference, make something better in this world. I love this. This is super cool. So appreciate your perspective. Super appreciate your passion. But most of all, thank you so much for being a guest here on the official Do Good Better podcast.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. It's wonderful to have a chance to have this conversation, and look forward to listening to the next one.
Love it, my friend.
All right.